So, before I get to the national results, I just want to say something about the experience. Who feels like they just met someone a little bit deeper through the conversation you had? Yeah, I find this all the time. We work with people where they've worked together for 10 years and they know stuff about each other. They know they play football on a Sunday afternoon. And when they have this conversation, I hear them go, oh, I never knew that was why you did this stuff, or whatever it is. And you're kind of meeting each other on a much deeper level. And in fact, the importance of the questions that came up, we don't really know the answer to all these questions. And I promise you that any questions you don't know the answer to, you have the rest of your lives to figure this stuff out. That we believe that about only 10% of the world's population have ever had the opportunity to answer the question, what are my personal values? And so that's why we made the personal values assessment free of charge for everybody, regardless of the ability to pay, because we believe that everybody should really understand what's in here, because then the stuff that's out there makes a whole lot more sense. And so we've worked with the Office of National Statistics and the Cabinet Office and a number of other organisations and Action for Happiness to do a values assessment of the whole of the UK. And all these results have also been made completely freely available to everybody, so that whether you're a business person or work in the NHS, or you run a government department, or you're trying to create a community group, it doesn't matter what it is, then there's stuff in here that's got powerful messages about who we are as a population. And this actually, on the day I saw the results, I went to go and buy some eggs from Brian, who lives in my village, and he's got a few ducks and hens, and so he's got an honesty box. And I said to him, Brian, how often do people take eggs and not actually put money in the box? And he said, never. And that struck a chord, and you'll see the results in a bit, and why that struck such a powerful chord with me. So these are the countries that we've done values assessments in so far. And for anybody who said France, actually the picture of France was almost exactly the same as America. So you were pretty close there. But you can see there's a whole range of different nations, and we're either asked by citizen groups within a nation or the government to support them in having this level of understanding and dialogue. And very quickly, here's who we asked in the UK, a sample size of 4,000 people. It was done to be statistically valid in accordance with the way the Office of National Statistics would do it, and you can see various different demographic groups here. But for the moment, do you trust me enough to do it? So I want you to imagine a group of people who stood in front of you. And I'm going to fill those people up in your minds with certain qualities. Their lives are based on caring, family, and friendship. These qualities create a positive sense of belonging and connectedness. A healthy sense of respect shows that they accept other people for who they are. They are independent, which shows they don't need to follow the crowd and can make their own choices. When there is a choice to make about what's the right thing to do, their decisions are guided by trust, honesty, and fairness. These people enjoy each other's company and laughing together, as demonstrated by humor and fun. Finally, this group stands for compassion. When others are in need, their actions are driven by love, not fear, and the desire to serve others. So who is that group of people? Well, open your eyes and take a look around, and you'll be looking at them. Because these are the values that we found when we asked the question, select the values and behaviors that most reflect who you are. These are the values we found. And there are two things that really characterize this. One is very strong relationships, caring, family, friendship, compassion. And there's another piece, there's a really strong word around integrity. Who was talking about some values that become umbrellas for other values? Well, when you find honesty and fairness and trust, that's an umbrella, I would say, that is really bound up by this word of integrity. And is this true for everybody? Maybe not. Are there some people who struggle to live this, so that they might hold these values as being important, but they might not actually be able to live all of these all the time in their life? Well, that's true as well. And actually, it's related to the stuff that I said before, that when our own personal fears show up, It stops us from being able to really express our own personal values in a powerful way. But this is who the people of the UK are collectively, across the 4,000. And what actually we were talking this afternoon, that in every nation you'll find similar sets of personal values, but it's the unique combination of these particular words that creates the magic of describing a particular group or a particular population. So we asked another question about how they experience life in their local community. And what you'll see is, actually, this is a very positive thing. Quality of life, family, buy local, helpfulness, friendship, community services, safety. Now, some limiting values, some of these fear things start to show up. Drugs and alcohol, uncertainty about the future, but then a positive one again, sense of community. So, when you think about what people actually experience in their day-to-day lives, most of it is generally very positive. But then we ask another question. Select the values that reflect how your nation currently operates. Select the values that reflect how the UK currently operates. And this is how people responded. Bureaucracy, crime, violence, uncertainty about the future, corruption, blame, wasted resources, media influence, conflict, aggression, drugs, alcohol, apathy. And my question, which I put on here, is if people are seeing the nation like this, but their own daily lives are much more positive, then where's the disconnect? And of course, we can't experience a whole nation. We can only perceive that. And I think it's the difference between lived experience and external perception, a lot of which actually I think might be coming through this media influence. Because I could point to a story in the news in the last 3 months that would prove that every single one of those is true. But it's not true in most people's daily lives. In fact, when I was in Venezuela presenting the results, I was told, don't leave the hotel, because if you leave the hotel, your chances of being mugged or murdered are better than 50%. And when I did leave the hotel with people who chaperoned me, we were seeing real violence on the street. We were seeing people living in really difficult situations like this. And so I saw the difference between people's lived experience of looking like this and actually somewhere like the UK or the USA, where we have this perception it's all bad out there, but my life's pretty okay. I can go out in the morning, I can go to work, I can go to the shops, and I won't have experienced corruption by the end of the day. I won't have seen crime or violence, generally. And so there's a really interesting dialogue. We have to explore this more to understand what this actually means. And then we ask the question, select what you would desire for your community or the nation to really be a high-performing and place that supports well-being. And you can see these values here. Actually, there was an overlap between the community and the national values, so I plopped them all together for the sake of brevity this evening. And these are sort of words. But I remember Mark, when he first saw these, Mark from Action for Happiness, he said this is so interesting that the government's number one priority right now is economic growth. And there's not a lot in here about people's priorities that are really about economic growth. This is about quality of life. Now, granted, you're going to need a certain amount of money to make these things true. But it's really about so this accountability word is also critical. Are we as a population going to just point our fingers at the government and we say, we hold you accountable to deliver the lives that we want? Or do we hold ourselves accountable to create the lives that we want in our families, in our communities, and let the government catch up with us down the line? Because there are so many communities that are doing that now, that are saying, either we're a whole city and we're going to build this city to be what we want, or we're a village and we're going to do that, and that's starting. And we call that process mass individuation. We're no longer waiting for the elites and the leaders and the politicians and the bosses to tell us what to do. We're going to figure this stuff out for ourselves. And Egypt was a perfect example of that. And boy, that's still painful. There's a lot going through. So this is not easy stuff, but it can be done. And so just some interesting insights that came from this. The overall entropy score for the UK, 59%. And then we measured it in all these different regional blocks as well. And the overall entropy score, when you look at the community view, was 22%, which is pretty healthy, actually. But let's just focus on one for a second, London. London, when it looks at the national view, is the healthiest at 52%. London, when you look at the community view, is amongst the least healthy, so 24, which there's another one up there in the northeast, is at 24. So, again, what does this all mean? This is part of the dialogue that we need to get into as part of this data. Entropy scores by nation, and I told you about Venezuela and how it was so difficult there. So UK is pretty high up on the entropy scores, but it's together with France and USA, and in terms of kind of democratic process, in terms of development as a nation, although we're culturally very different to France and the USA, I think you could say that we're fairly similar in those sort of processes. But then you go down to Bhutan and we find a cultural entropy score of 4%. And this is really about people living in a system that meets their needs. And in fact, we had someone here, we had a meeting this afternoon from the United Arab Emirates. We've just published their results a month ago, and 12%. And the government in the UAE has said, great starting point, but we want to go further. We want to become the first values-driven nation on the planet. And so there's a competition now to become values-driven. I like it when competitions like that. Okay, so all I want to say about this, I think I said it before, we categorize values into these different levels. This tells us how strongly relationship oriented the people of the UK are. Okay, I want to tell you about the danger of seeing any of this stuff as being true. When we produce our results, we say this is just a starting point for a conversation. So, what do you notice in here about the value of independence when you look at England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales? Doesn't show up in Scotland. Okay. So what might you infer about that given the current kind of big hoo-ha that's going on? So what I'm saying, be careful about things not being true. Firstly, let's just be careful about the interpretation we put on these words. So personally, I don't believe that independence in here is a statement about we want to have political independence. I think it's much more about a state of inner being rather than political statement. The other thing to know is that when we looked at the results, the 11th value in the list for Scotland was independence. So why am I telling you this? That the results are just a starting point for a conversation. And it's doing what you just did in pairs, or at the level of a community or a village or a team or a whole organization or a nation, and it's all about dialogue. That's the important part, not the data. The data helps you to get to that point of like, well, what are we going to talk about? What are the important stuff we want to talk about? And the other thing that we saw, so this is values by age, 16 to 19, 35, 45, up to 75. You'll see that certain values become more or less important. So let me take friendship here. This line starts really important, and as you get older and older, that drops down. And what's the green one? This is honesty, which goes up. And so what this tells us in data is stuff that we've discovered, that people's priorities change during their life, depending on what's going on within their life conditions or their development or their family. And so it's not that I become less honest, it's just that my priorities change. And so the way I view the world is through that lens of those values. Now, two other quick pieces to show you. One is, we already showed you the top 10. Those are the top 10 words. What we then do is we look at the next 10 to say, what's sitting underneath that? Is what's underneath it generally healthy or generally unhealthy? And as you can see, we've got a lot of challenges here, because what's sitting underneath it is generally unhealthy. We cite materialistic poverty, discrimination, etc. So there's a lot of issues that sit underneath the top 10 values. When we go to the community level, actually we find something that is a very positive foundation. So there's a few limiting values that sit in there, but for the most part, people, when you get beneath the top 10, Mostly, it's a positive picture of how people experience their communities there as well. So, I have a brilliant friend who does this work in corporations, and she says there has to be core messages around what the transformation means, like a mindset of where the change is going to come from. So this was part of the speech this week. In fact, Sarah, thank you, Sarah, for giving me this quote today. All society's ills cannot be cured by government alone. And that's what I said before. Who's accountable? And do we look to ourselves before we look to other people? This is not a project to be rolled out. It's a challenging journey to be lived. We're in the process of emergent learning. We're figuring this stuff out as we go along. And as Egypt are discovering right now, this is really hard stuff. And I think we're going to have our own personal challenges and team challenges and community challenges and national challenges. So you've got to go with it, but stay with the program. Organizations do not transform, people do. I'm going to read that one again. Organizations do not transform, people do. Once again, it comes down to what's happening inside of here. Problems cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness that you created them. So our friend Einstein said this, and that 7 levels of consciousness is a perfect example. So like level 3, value of bureaucracy, which starts to get in the way of things, well, people, if you try to put more systems and processes in place to combat the bureaucracy, you're going to end up with more bureaucracy. If you go to level 4, you find the value of accountability. And so you've shifted up to a higher level of consciousness that enables you to challenge some of the problems that you have at those lower levels. And the last one is transformation takes time. Don't expect this stuff to happen overnight. Because it takes time and it takes commitment and it takes work. And I go back to the other one, it takes dialogue. Unless you're willing to get into dialogue, then you're really not going to change anything. So my personal deepest belief about this work I want to share with you now. About 8 years ago, I went into a friend's house, and this was a fridge magnet on my friend's fridge. And it's not often you can say your life was transformed by a fridge magnet. But when I saw this, it was like, it was just like I just understood something completely different. And it took an inquiry. I took 2 years to really look into this idea. And I've now defined happiness for myself. This is my definition. Happiness is the extent to which you live in love as opposed to living in fear. Now, this is my very simple way of looking at our pictures. In our pictures, we've got white dots, which are all the fear things. Blame, manipulation, corruption, crime, violence, drug addiction, all those things. They're all parts of fear. And for me, everything else, all the blue dots, are love. And so our job as individuals and as leaders is for ourselves and for the people we lead, is to face our own fears and help them face their fears, to shift from fear to love. And when I talk about love in this sense, I'm not talking necessarily about the soft, fluffy, romantic stuff. I'm talking about the ability, that stuff that's in here, that enables you to take the tough decisions and do what's right because you truly believe it, because it comes from a place of love rather than a place of fear. And that's what I'm talking about.